Is Dead Island 2 a worthy sequel? That's a good question that I'm going to try to answer in my video today, and timestamps are in the description if you want to skip around. I'm going to start things off by noting that this is not the direct sequel to 2011's Dead Island, as that title goes to Dead Island Riptide, and DI2 takes place after Riptide, but that out of the way, I must say that Dead Island 2 is a fun game that made a lot of changes from the first two DI titles. Some good, some not so good, but I would like to start things off with positives, and I must praise this game's stellar graphics. I personally haven't played many games on Series X, but this is one of the best looking titles I've so far experienced on the console, with detailed characters, weapons, environments, and of course, zombie gore. Dead Island 2 is probably the most gruesome zombie game that I have ever seen, gory to the point that it had to be censored in Germany to even be released there. And while this isn't a huge bar given Germany's history of game censorship, I'd still call it a bragging right for Dambuster Studios. Something like, "Our game is so intense, the normal version is outlawed in some places." I mean, hey, that'd catch my attention. Anyways, DI2 is an absolute bloodbath, which is great for us zombie enthusiasts. The more the better for us fans of the undead, and this game has it all. Decapitations, massive pools of red plasma, blood splatters when whacking zombies with your tools of combat, hacking off chunks of flesh, total dismemberments, frickin' punching into a Zed's head and ripping out their brains, harvesting organs to use for weapons, just scarlet and flesh everywhere. So Dead Island 2 gets an A++ for the goriness. Moving a bit more into the combat itself, the main selling point of this series, it's very fun, but also quite different from its predecessors, with the most notable difference above all else probably being the altered stamina system. In previous games, your stamina drained from basic attacks and sprinting, but in DI2 you can run indefinitely, and basic attacks don't drain your energy, only special moves, being things like drop kicks or charged attacks. And while special attacks were sort of present on Riptide, like being able to stomp the skull in of a downed zombie or drop attacks, it was way more refined for DI2, and it was a lot more useful on this game versus on Riptide. But the unlimited stamina for normal attacks and sprinting came at a cost, in its own way. In the first two games, you had to be a bit more careful about running into a situation, as you knew that you could get tuckered out easily if caution wasn't observed, versus Dead Island 2 where you could often just bum rush a group of the undead, which caused DI2 to be significantly easier than the earlier installments in the Dead Island series in my opinion, but I totally understand why someone would prefer the updated stamina system. Being honest, I think that both systems are great, the more defensively natured stamina meter of 1 and Riptide, and the more aggressive system of DI2. Pros and cons, you know? But what was a massive bummer related to having unlimited stamina for sprinting was the removal of drivable vehicles. For those who don't know, Dead Island 1 has drivable cars, and Riptide has boats in addition to also having ground vehicles, and I really enjoyed ramming Zeeks with automobiles and boats in the first two games, in addition to them being great for transportation, and I guess having unlimited sprint was intended to replace driving. I think it would have been great to have both really, being able to run forever in small areas without sweet rides, while also being allowed to commit vehicular carnage on the undead while behind the wheel. You can't win them all, I guess, and I do appreciate unlimited sprint, but man, I hope cars make a comeback if we ever see a Dead Island 3.
Danger close, mortars. Ready when you are.
Moving on to other aspects of warfare on the undead, the fighting itself is pretty similar to the first two titles. Hack and slash first-person combat with a large arsenal of melee weapons, and with some guns and throwables tossed in. The melee combat is very addictive, having the player hack away at zombies with things like swords, axes, hammers, baseball bats, etc., while throwing in kicks and special attacks whenever it's warranted. And DI2 introduced blocking mechanics, allowing the player to block attacks from the zombies, and a well-timed block can stun a zombie, leaving them open to brutal, often one-hit counterattacks. The gunplay is pretty much identical to that of earlier games, shooting Zeds with a variety of firearms, like rifles, pistols, and shotguns, although ammo isn't super common and I usually only broke out a gun when I was in a dicey situation, and hand-to-hand fighting wouldn't quite cut it. Don't mind my crappy pun. Moving on to discuss a combat change that I wasn't a huge fan of, that is throwable objects, or, as Dambuster calls them, curveballs.
Curveball and such,
I think Riptide handled throwable objects the best of the three mainline games, giving you a large variety to choose from, throwing knives, molotovs, mines, grenades, etc., and a large inventory, plus not having any cooldown time required, so you could just spam a horde or a boss with explosives until they died. And DI2 mixed things up to where you have infinite throwables, but they have a cooldown time, making explosive spamming impossible. I mean, sure, it was integrated into being more free-flowing, allowing you to toss your sticky bomb or your shurikens on the go, versus having to equip them as your primary weapon on Riptide, but having to wait and wait before being allowed to chuck more kinda stinks when you consider that previous games let you freely use explosives. But, as the saying goes, you win some, you lose some, but at least you do wield a decent variety of these, like chemical bombs or bait traps, unlocked throughout the game as rewards for side quests and things like that, trumping the first game which only has basic grenades and molotovs, but I still think Riptide is king of the hill when it comes to throwables. Continuing in the discussion of battle, a couple other things that I wasn't super fond of in DI2 was the medkit and the death system. I can't remember the medkit limit on the first couple of games, but it was certainly more than DI2's paltry 5. Plus DI2 only has one size medical kit, versus the first two titles having small, medium, and large. But at least both games do contain food items lying around that you can eat for some healing. And DI2 gave you some other ways to restore lost HP, like the character Ryan, who I chose, gaining some health whenever he knocks a zombie over, or gaining some health when he stomps a down zombie's skull in. So the health system was kind of a mixed bag for me. Sometimes I wished I could have some extra medical items on me, but I also appreciate having to get creative with my fighting style in order to recover health. But I wasn't so appreciative of the death system in DI2. In the first two games, when you die, you respawn and you're sent right back from where you left off almost exactly when you died. But in DI2, when you die, you're sent back to your last checkpoint, which, while normal in most games these days, wasn't the Dead Island style, and it could be a wee bit irritating having to restart a battle or an area from the very beginning while knowing the previous games would let me pick up right from where I left off. But changing gears into a positive, I did love the enemy variety that this game offered. Walkers, runners, screamers, slobbers, crushers, and more, most having extra dangerous variants, like electric or flaming zombies, although I think I preferred the crushers' ancestors, the thugs, of the first two games, who were way more dangerous and tougher to deal with in my opinion, but the large foe variety made up for the thugs getting a downgrade, so I'll let it slide. Another notable difference I will mention is that I don't recall seeing any zombies with weapons on Dead Island 2, versus some Zeds being armed on the first game, and there also weren't any human foes. I'm not saying this was a good or a bad change, just something that I thought was worth mentioning. Wrapping up my discussion of this game's combat, while all the mainline DI games have weapon deterioration with use, the first two games excelled in that you could actually watch your weapon's condition worsen the more you use them, versus in DI2 where, as far as I could tell, your tool for fighting always looked the same regardless of what shape it was in, be it 100% or 25% condition, not counting blood on your weaponry of course. Also, the Rage mode made a comeback, charged by offing Zeeks and activated at the player's will. It grants you a few seconds of hyper damage while using your bare hands, and also giving you a massive defense boost, so very handy in tight spots. As far as my final note for the combat itself, spoiler alert, after beating the main story, you get to use Sam B's hammer, which can be used in New Game Plus, or for side quest and DLCs after the primary storyline has been finished, which is a super powerful weapon, with the downside of being really slow. But overall, it was pretty good, and I did enjoy using it. Going to discuss other things, I would like to talk about the skill and level up system, which was very different than the first two games. DI1 and Riptide hold a more standard system. You level up with XP earned from completing quests and by killing enemy combatants, and with every new level, you gain a health boost and a skill point to spend however you please. DI2 is identical except in the skill department. Unlike unlocking a new skill every time that good old level up shows itself on your screen, you unlock skill cards, and sometimes skill card slots, with some cards found just lying around the game, others dropped as loot by Zeds, but most often acquired by gaining a new level, and you gotta play your cards smart, as even with your maximum slots unlocked, you can't have many active at once, and cards can do things like reducing the amount of rage required to activate it, or giving you new special attacks, or maybe even a mix of both, giving you new rage attacks. And while the card system was okay, I think I prefer the more standard level up system that the earlier Dead Island titles offer. Shifting over to a topic that I very lightly brushed on, I would like to chat for a minute about quests. A lot of them were pretty typical zombie game quests. Go to Area A, and go ham slaying the undead monsters, but some would require you to kill zombies in a certain way, or some would be fetch quests, or even one funny quest where you killed zombies for a YouTuber who was hoping to create a viral carnage video. But some quests were a bit more annoying, like ones where you were sent into an area and asked to look for clues that were required to progress, almost feeling like the crime scene investigations in the Arkham games where Batman searches an area for evidence. And I wasn't the biggest fan of such missions, as searching for objects could be annoying, but oh well, I guess it helped me appreciate the parts of the game that I did enjoy even more.
Got tanks of caustic X on their backs.
There were also a couple levels with math puzzles, which were just, why? I bought this game to unalive Zeeks, not to do homework. Another thing that did irritate me was having to search for keys. In the first two games, you could just break down locked doors, and you also had a lockpicking skill, which allowed you to open sealed containers by simply pressing X. But Dambuster thought it'd be better to make the player go on key hunts, which could be in some really random places sometimes, and this was another thing that Techland handled better if you were to ask me. Now, I must give the second Dead Island a positive mark here, in that you pick up money, used for buying goodies and repairing your weapons, by simply going near it, unlike in past games where you had to manually pick up cash by hitting the X button. So, this change was appreciated. Switching over to talk about the story, it was pretty good, and it left things open for another game, and it had some funny moments here and there, including a reference to another game developed by Dambuster and owned by Deep Silver, Homefront the Revolution, and this game offered a pretty fair variety of playable characters, but like I said earlier, I selected Ryan as he seemed the most tanky of the bunch. Wrapping up my review of this game, it does have co-op, which I tried a couple times, but as someone who generally prefers single-player games, I wasn't a massive fan of it, although I know that a lot of people love cooperative Dead Island gameplay. Performance-wise, the game ran near flawless, other than every now and then a zombie would just materialize out of thin air, which I'm pretty sure isn't supposed to happen, but it only occurred once or twice, so no biggie. Plus there were some other tiny issues here and there, but nothing really worth mentioning. This game also had some good loading times on solo, and some decent horror elements at times. The soundtrack was alright, with good sound effects, and great voice actors. In conclusion, I give this game a 9.2 out of 10 by my grade scale. So would I call Dead Island 2 a worthy sequel? Sort of. I prefer DI2 to DI1, but, hot take ahead, I prefer Riptide over Dead Island 2. But, it is a close call between the two, and I totally understand if someone disagrees with me. This is just my personal opinion. As far as similar games to Dead Island 2 that I can suggest, I know a lot of people might say Dying Light, but I've yet to play that one, so maybe the game Zombie if you want something scarier and more challenging, or maybe, I don't know, Skyrim. That is some really good first-person melee combat if you were to ask me. And as a side note apart from my review, I got the collector's edition, brand new, of this game for roughly $25 USD, which came with a 6 steelbook, a lot of DLCs, a physical map, and some other goodies, so that was a great deal for sure. As far as our Bible verse of the day, I read from Psalm 1, verse 6, NIV. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. And that's my video for today, folks. For any newcomers here, I mostly play, review, and discuss video games, with a large focus on zombie and horror titles, but other genres are on the table for me as well. And I have reviewed Dead Island, Riptide, and Retro Revenge for those interested, and I'll have some links in the end cards to some of those vids, and I'm planning Escape Dead Island as the next game in the series that I cover, so maybe sub if you want to be notified for when that's done. As always, none of my content is made by AI, and I don't consent to my voice and likeness being modified, altered, or copied by AI in any way. Jesus loves y'all, never forget that. Thanks for watching, God bless, peace.